So I think about Dark Souls bosses a lot, and one of the things that everyone kind of talks about is like, oh, it's like, what's the easiest boss? What's the hardest boss? Like for me personally, and I think for me it's not like that simple. It's like kind of a two-dimensional thing for me. So I kind of came up with this like graph basically of like, on one axis we have easy bosses, medium bosses, and hard bosses. And on the other axis, we have more of like a dynamism scale. So bosses that kind of range from like scripted, bosses where there's just a 100% consistent way to beat them every single time, to kind of in the middle, which is like more formulaic. So bosses where, you kind of just follow the same strategy every time and it gets you to where you need to go, versus bosses that are like completely dynamic, where there's not really a specific thing you do all the time. It's a dynamic boss. It moves around a lot. You have to dodge a lot and things like that. And in the middle, we have my beloved Dancer, because I think she's like the exact middle, in my opinion, for like challenge run. She's like medium difficulty. She's fairly formulaic, but not like scripted by any means. I think she's like a perfect middle ground for this. So I want to use kind of this graph to talk about some of the bosses over here. I just picked 3 bosses from, the Dark Souls trilogy and Bloodborne. I didn't put other bosses in here because it's just not as interesting for like Sekiro, for example. But to kind of illustrate the scale a little bit. So like Amelia, right? Amelia is a scripted boss. Like there's a 100% consistent script for Amelia. But at the same time, it's not like a free script. Like you do have to know what to do, but it once you know what to do, it's quite easy. So I would put Amelia about like here, I would say. Script is fairly easy. It does have things you need to know, but it's not too bad. And we can contrast this, for example, with Lawrence, which the script itself is actually very hard, but there is a script for Lawrence. And if you do the script, it's very precise, but if you do it, it is 100% consistent. So I'd put Lawrence up here in terms of, hey, this is a hard boss, like objectively, but there is a script. If you used another strategy, like the corner to corner strat, for example, it would probably fall more into formulaic and it would be a little easier. But just depending on the strategy you use, the difficulty and the dynamism of the fight will change, obviously. And then we got my boys, the Shadows. The Shadows are an extremely dynamic fight. There is not really a thing you can just do over and over again, besides like doing input baits and stuff. But at least for phase 1, there's not really you're not following a formula like you stick the Dancer's butt or whatever. So I would consider Shadows at the very end like one of the most dynamic bosses, and also on the very hard end as well. I'd say probably harder than they are dynamic. So that's Bloodborne. I mean, there's obviously a lot of Bloodborne bosses, but just 3 to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. The gargoyles also kind of illustrate how much strats matter for this, because there are very easy Garg scripts that you can do. Like the gargoyles are easier than Amelia when it comes to scripts. If you fight them super low damage, they become an extremely dynamic fight, where there isn't a formulaic way to beat them. But for my purposes, on most runs, you can script the gargoyles very easily. So I'm going to put them down here. I do need to leave a little room for a certain Dark Souls 2 boss coming up. ONS, obviously an extremely dynamic boss fight, right up there with Shadows. I would say ONS is a bit more dynamic than Shadows and a bit easier than Shadows, so I think it goes under the line. Maybe something like this. There's a bit of a formula to it, like, you have to separate them, and there's a strategy to it, and that doesn't mean it's not dynamic. It's just, I would say they're a bit more dynamic than the Shadows. And then the final Dark Souls boss I want to talk about is Quelaag. Quelaag, in my view, is like a completely formulaic boss, the way that I fight her anyways, which is you just dodge away from any melee attacks, you punish the lava attacks, and it's extremely easy, but it's extremely formulaic. Not scripted by any means. She has way too much HP to be scripted, but extremely formulaic and extremely easy. At the very bottom left of this graph will be the Dragon Rider. I'm going to make him super small because I don't have any room and he doesn't deserve much more than that. I think basically everyone who plays Dark Souls 2 multiple times knows about making Dragon Rider fall off, and it just makes the fight trivial, of course. We also have Mirror Knight. So there are scripts for Mirror Knight as well. The scripts are fairly easy to execute. On his own, he's a pretty formulaic boss, like just dodge everything to the left, you know. I wouldn't say he's easy by any means, but on most runs he's very approachable, so I think he kind of belongs maybe a little above Quelaag, but definitely below Dancer on the like hard scale, and definitely a lot more scripted than Dancer is. And then the last one would be Thronies. Like most duo fights, Thronies is not particularly scripted. There is, I think, a semi-script you can do if you have enough damage, but we're not counting that. We're counting the like run around and shoot with the bow strat here. The fight's quite dynamic, quite difficult, especially SL1, for example. Definitely not as dynamic as ONS in my opinion, or Shadows. So I think it would go a little to the left of Shadows. Definitely more dynamic than the other fights here, and probably a bit easier than ONS. And I think ONS is a bit harder than I'm giving it here. So we can move ONS up. And we can move Thronies up as well. And then let's go to Dark Souls 3. So in my mind, Dark Souls 3 has probably the best boss of the entire series, which is Soul of Cinder. An extremely dynamic fight, very, very fun fight. There's no, you know, I guess technically if you had the Bandit's Knife, you can make phase 2 a little easier, but Cinder is not as hard as ONS for sure, but Cinder I would say is probably the most dynamic fight, maybe besides like Gale or something in the series. And yeah, next would be Midir. Midir's a lot more formulaic, but I would say Midir's a lot harder. Midir is probably similar level to Cinder in terms of difficulty, but in terms of formulaic, like stay at the head, dodge everything, go back to the head, like those sorts of things make the fight a lot more formulaic, but a bit more dynamic than Dancer, I would say, and more dynamic than Quelaag. So I just wanted to throw a few bosses on the chart to kind of illustrate, and I'll move myself over so you can see everything, but I just wanted to kind of show what I meant by, like, you know, difficulty and dynamism and stuff, and more how I think about fights. There can be very hard scripted bosses. There can be very easy formulaic bosses. Obviously, the more dynamic the boss, you know, you're going to tend to have harder fights because there's more to learn. Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to talk about a little bit how I think about difficulty, because people always ask me like, oh, what's the hardest boss? What's the easiest boss? What's the most fun boss? What's your favorite boss? What's your least favorite boss? What's your favorite game? All that stuff. This is how I think about it. It's like, there are hard bosses that are scripted. There are easy bosses that are more fun to fight and more dynamic. It just kind of varies, you know? And obviously there's correlation, but yeah, I just want to talk about that a little bit.